Hey everyone, so I just wanted to do a video now. I was going to say a quick video, but it might end up being relatively long. Just an off-the-cuff, unscripted video. Just kind of addressing my last video, which was the what if every franchise in Super Smash Bros. Had 8 characters. It did incredibly well, over 100,000 views as of recording this. And I'm really happy with that. I am doing a follow-up where I'm going to be talking about 40 more franchises. Still kind of working on that slowly. But just in the meantime, and while I'm still working on another video as well, but just in the meantime, I just wanted to address some of the common questions that came up, or the common comments, because there were a lot of people who had thoughts about some of the franchises and characters that were included in the challenge, and you know there were some opinions people had. So I wanted to just address some of those and explain why I made some of the decisions that I made. So I wanted to start with the Mario franchise, and most of the discussion kind of centered around Daisy. That was kind of the biggest hornet's nest that was kicked, as it were. A lot of people were just kind of baffled by the fact that Daisy was left out, and I think a lot of that comes from the fact that she is kind of perceived to have something of a main cast status now, which I agree with to an extent. But I would say that while yes, she was in Wonder, she's certainly not the only one who was in Wonder. And she has also been part of the theme park, I think it's Universal Studios theme park in America. So she does have some a claim to the idea that she's part of the main cast. But both of those are fairly recent things. She's still a relatively new character in that main cast, and I would argue that Toadette is actually a much stronger argument to be made that she's being convincingly added to the main cast. It was mainly Rosalina, Waluigi, and Captain Toad that people really thought that should be dropped for Daisy. Rosalina, I think it's obvious why I would choose Rosalina over Daisy, other than the fact that I like Rosalina. But Daisy just doesn't have almost nearly as much to work with. Rosalina has a very, very specific identity. And it just kind of feels a bit weird to think that Daisy could be there over Rosalina and be more unique. And Rosalina also just represents Galaxy, which is arguably one of the, it's arguably the most beloved game in the entire franchise. And in a franchise like this, that's a big deal. Captain Toad is a bit of a weird one. I would say that a lot of people thought that Captain Toad would, it just doesn't feel like a main character as much as Daisy. Which I kind of get, but again, Daisy is only very, very recent in that role, whereas Captain Toad has been in the main series almost constantly for almost 2 decades at this point, and he always has some sort of role, sometimes a significant role. He's never playable, but that doesn't mean he isn't significant. But he also just represents the Toads, and even ignoring that, which I don't think you should because the Toads are a major race, but even ignoring that, Toad himself seems to have been... Nintendo seem to want Toad and Captain Toad to be the same character. Which may surprise some people if they've been watching my videos for a while, considering my video, Who is Toad? I said that Toad and Captain Toad aren't the same character. It seems like they could be, linked, but largely they seem to be insisting that Captain Toad and Toad aren't the same character. That's what I said back then. However, since then we've had things like the Mario movie, where Toad was very clearly styled after Captain Toad, yet still called Toad. We've had things like Mario Kart Tour, where Captain Toad is an alternate costume for Toad. Obviously, the way that alternate costumes work in that game is a bit weird, but still, it's still notable. I think that Nintendo is trying to move to a point where Toad and Captain Toad are the same character. So it just feels a bit weird not to have a Toad character at all, and even if you do have a Toad character, to not make it Captain Toad. So I don't think that you can replace Daisy with something as big as Toad or Captain Toad. It has to be either Toad or Captain Toad, not Daisy. Waluigi is one of the more convincing characters. I disagree strongly with the idea that Daisy has had as much fan request as Waluigi. Maybe back in the day she had a certain amount, but I know that throughout Smash 4 speculation, Daisy was not as hotly discussed as Waluigi. And you might say that a lot of that is memes, but it doesn't really matter. Waluigi is popular. It doesn't matter if he's popular as a meme. But also there's another thing, and it's the fact that Waluigi represents the spin-offs incredibly well. And the spin-offs are one of the biggest parts of the Mario franchise, so it feels a bit weird not to represent them. And the reason he represents the spin-offs better than Daisy is because he originated from a spin-off. He originated in Mario Tennis. And that means that he is baked into the DNA of a massive part of the Mario franchise. He's almost inseparable from the concept, to the point where that when he's not actually available in them, it's noted. Not only that, he has been in more spin-offs than Daisy, despite existing, for less time than Daisy. He was also in a spin-off, I think it was Mario Tennis on the Game Boy Advance, where Wario wasn't available. So I think that because of that, and because of the fact that Waluigi can represent such a significant part of the Mario franchise, you can't cut him in favour of Daisy, or rather you can't have Daisy instead of Waluigi. So Daisy has her merits as a character in the Mario franchise. I just don't think that she's there in the case where you're narrowing it down to just 8. Also, I was surprised by the amount of people quite angry that Piranha Plant was cut, which I love Piranha Plant. He's one of my mains, but Piranha Plant doesn't get in. Let's be completely real here. Piranha Plant is a generic enemy, and that is what makes him funny, but he also just isn't the best example of a generic enemy in Mario anyway. So, as great as Piranha Plant is as an addition, and one of the best examples you could choose in that role, I do think that Piranha Plant is one that is a fairly easy cut. I just wanted to quickly mention Donkey Kong as a franchise, because a few people said, Lanky Kong, where's he? And there's some changes you can make, but a lot of people thought that Donkey Kong Jr. should be the character that gets cut, and I get that. However, I think you need to have some arcade rep, considering Donkey Kong Country is popular, don't get me wrong, that side of Donkey Kong is a popular part, but the arcade games are literally almost inseparable from the idea of video game history, the original Donkey Kong especially. So just to not represent that part of the Donkey Kong franchise is just wrong, and Cranky Kong and Donkey Kong, while technically are part of that franchise in their own individual ways, or part of that sub-series, they don't represent the arcade games very well, considering Cranky Kong has a completely different design, and, well, so does Donkey Kong, really. They're both designed on Donkey Kong Country, primarily. So I think that you realistically have to have an arcade rep, and Donkey Kong Jr. might not be the best. I actually still like the idea of Stanley Bugman, but I think that you have to have an arcade rep. I was also surprised by the amount of people that said Toon or Young Link should be there, especially instead of Varty, which I get Varty was a bit of a left field pick, and some people said, oh, what about Jurahim? And yeah, there are choices you can make here. However, on Toon or Young Link specifically, I think I actually did acknowledge this about the fact that you can have Toon or Young Link there and not break the rule, I'm doing air quotes, about not having the same, canonically the same character. You can have them there, but I didn't want to do that. It just feels a bit... I know that Young Link could be given a more unique moveset. I just think it's better to go for unique characters. That's maybe just a personal thing for me. And it's not really necessarily for me to comment on things like that in terms of, you know, franchises that I'm not well versed in or that I'm not a massive fan of, and I get that. But I do think that Young and Toon Link, while there's potential there, I just think having other characters is better. I think the fact that I included Mega Man and Mega Man X there didn't really help my case. And yeah, as I said, in reality, actually, if I was doing it again, I might actually not include X, because I actually prefer the idea of not having more than one Mega Man. But it just felt like a different situation. It just felt like it's a little bit more crucial to represent multiple Mega Mans rather than including multiple Links. That's how it felt from what I was getting from people when I was asking these questions, and just my own personal opinion as well. Shy Guy is another one. Shy Guy, I get. I do get that Shy Guy appears more in the Yoshi franchise than the Mario franchise, realistically. But Shy Guy isn't absent from the Mario franchise. I only recently realised that there's Fly Guys in Super Mario 64, but they are a type of Shy Guy. So it's not as if Shy Guys are absent, and they're also in things like Captain Toad. I just think that Shy Guys, while yes, they are definitely very much Yoshi characters, I do feel like they're also Mario characters, and they feel a little bit more like Mario characters to me than Yoshi characters. On the other hand, Kamek, I think, even though Kamek himself is definitely both a Mario and Yoshi character in the same way as the Shy Guys, Kamek himself actually originated from Yoshi's Island, which I think is a key distinction. There were Magic Koopas in Super Mario World, but not specifically Kamek. And while the actual history of Kamek and as a character is a little bit murky, considering in Japan Kamek is known as Magic Koopa, I think you can very much make the case that Kamek is absolutely a character and originated from Yoshi's Island, and is also one of the primary antagonists of that game. So it would feel weird not to have Kamek in the Yoshi franchise, considering Kamek plays a much more significant role in Yoshi's franchise than in the Mario franchise. And you could say the same about Shy Guys, but I think the fact that Kamek originates from Yoshi's Island is the tipping point there. I also just think that the Bandits still represent a Shy Guy in a relatively good way, and are just more interesting, honestly. I'm not going to go through every character that people suggested. There's characters like Dark Matter, for example, for Kirby that, yeah, probably would have been better than having, for example, Gooey. And the Emmys for Metroid as well, which I still don't think would be a fantastic... Well, I mean, would be decent, but I don't think one that I would include still. But I did very specifically want to focus on Pokemon, because people just really wanted a grass starter, and it just makes no sense to me. Because you're only choosing a grass starter because it's a grass starter, not because it's actually the best fit. And I think that you can split the characters that I actually chose into very distinct groups, and some of them are absolute unmovables. The first group that you can split them into is the Gen 1 Pokemon that are just too popular not to be included. You can't cut, in my mind, for this challenge, Charizard, Mewtwo, and Pikachu. Especially Pikachu, but Charizard and Mewtwo are so iconic, you can't get rid of them. You also can't cut Greninja, Lucario, and Mimikyu from this, because they are the three most popular Pokemon, as determined by the most recent poll on the matter, or the biggest poll that we've realistically ever had. And of course, things do change, but I still think that Lucario is possibly the most popular Pokemon now, based on everything that's been done with it since. Greninja is maybe a bit lower down, but it came top, so we can't really cut it. And Mimikyu has had a massive marketing presence, so I don't think that you can cut Mimikyu either from this, because it is just that insanely popular. And Mimikyu does have moveset potential. It's a Ghost and Fairy type, and it has a massive clawed hand, there's things you can do with Mimikyu, and the disguise ability gives you a little bit of a gimmick as well there. So those 6 I feel are you can't move them. They are solid, and Mimikyu's inclusion in that means that Decidueye just doesn't compare. Decidueye is very popular, but Mimikyu is more popular, and that kind of matters here. In terms of Sceptile and Meowscarada, now Meowscarada is only relevant insofar as replacing Tinkaton. If I had my time again, I actually would probably replace Tinkaton with Ogerpon, because Ogerpon is incredibly popular, as we have been able to see since the Teal Mask released. But it's also plot relevant to the game, and it just feels like a really good addition to me. Tinkaton is incredibly popular as well, but I do think that that's one where it's more flash in the pan. It's more of a Snom kind of situation, where Snom was incredibly popular back in Gen 8, but the idea of Snom in Smash now, I mean, even back then, but the idea of Snom in Smash just wouldn't... Its time came, its time went. Tinkaton will probably be the same. But Ogerpon, I think, is going to remain incredibly popular. But Meowscarada, I think, is actually very similar to something like Tinkaton, where it's popular now, but it's only really popular because it's a grass starter and people want it in Smash. That's the only reason. And the reason I know this is because the exact same thing happened to Rillaboom. Yeah, remember when Rillaboom was a popular pick for Smash? Imagine if Rillaboom had been added and we were looking at it now. That would feel so weird. And Meowscarada's the same. When Gen 10 comes along, a new grass starter will be the focus of people speculating, oh, this Pokemon should be in Smash. And no one will really care about Meowscarada. And that kind of leaves us really with Sceptile as the only choice. But Sceptile isn't even the best choice in its own evolutionary line, because that would be Grovyle, because Grovyle is arguably more popular, but also represents Mystery Dungeon. And that's a possible option you could go for including a grass-type Pokemon, a grass starter, I guess. However, if you're representing a spin-off, you're not going to represent Mystery Dungeon. You're going to represent Pokemon Go. And you have a Pokemon you can do that with. Or, I mean, 2 Pokemon, technically. It could either be Meltan or Melmetal. And considering Pokemon Go was such a massive phenomenon, it actually would make so much more sense to include Melmetal rather than Grovyle if you're representing a spin-off. So that's a no-go in my mind. And then it just kind of comes down to, okay, Sceptile versus Zoroark. And you can't really say, okay, well, what about Sceptile instead of the Gen 9 Pokemon? Because that leaves you without a Gen 8 or Gen 9 Pokemon. You're lacking any modern rep, really. Mimikyu being the most recent, if you went that route. So that's just a no-go as well for me. But so in terms of Sceptile, yeah, I don't think that Zoroark goes up against Sceptile in any meaningful way. You could say, well, maybe Sceptile's more popular than Zoroark, but Zoroark represents Gen 5, one of the most popular generations, and also Zoroark was an incredibly highly requested character for Smash, one of the most highly requested Pokemon that didn't get in, and it always felt like the one that got away. But you could just go on base popularity, but even if you go purely on base popularity, Sceptile still doesn't get in. Because Eevee is there, Eevee is incredibly popular, incredibly iconic, and even if you didn't want to go for another Gen 1 Pokemon, Umbreon came 4th in the Pokemon of the Year poll. So there's just no way that a grass-type starter makes the most sense. It just doesn't. If you want to represent, even if you just want to represent that triangle, that's the only reason you want to do it, which I don't think is a good reason. There's just better things to represent. We don't have an Ultra Beast, for example, or we don't have a mythical Pokemon. There's Arceus could feasibly work, things like that. There's just so many other things that you could represent, and I don't think that just representing a grass starter for the sake of representing a grass starter does the franchise justice from from a popularity point of view, from a generational spread point of view, or just from representing what's in the franchise point of view. It doesn't make sense. The day that we get a starter Pokemon, a grass starter Pokemon, as popular as Charizard or Greninja, that is the day that that Pokemon will feel like a natural fit. Until then, I just don't see it, and I never have, and I don't think I ever will. And I'm kind of fed up of, just getting starters in Smash anyway. I think it's high time we moved away from that, and that's why something like Ogerpon would just be better, in my opinion. I did want to talk briefly about, Ice Climbers is the next franchise. I'm going kind of through the franchises and just talking about the ones I want to. Ice Climbers is the next franchise that kind of has something to talk about, but it's actually more in relation to Duck Hunt, so I'm going to just cover all of the retros here, because a lot of people said to me, well, Slade, why don't you just include all the retros together? That would just be kind of boring, in my opinion, and just wouldn't feel like I'm adhering to the challenge. And sure, it would be cool. It would be cool to be able to represent some other retros. You could go for Mac Rider, you could go for Takamaru from the mysterious Murasame Castle. There are some great options for retro characters, but I personally think that there was actually Ice Climbers actually kind of proves it, and Game & Watch as well. Ice Climbers and Game & Watch kind of prove that there are characters that you can take from these games, and granted, they're not always going to be the greatest options, but I do think that there were some options. Game & Watch actually, I think, stands alone. I think that the options that we had for Game & Watch are good options. They would make good Smash characters, and there's a certain element of, okay, it's just a bit funny to say, oh, I'm gonna add a bee, I'm gonna add a butterfly, and I'm glad that a lot of people kind of saw the humour in that. And especially when it comes to Duck Hunt, because Duck Hunt is the one that really doesn't have anything to use. R.O.B, you can kind of make the case of, that doesn't really work, but Duck Hunt is the one where it's literally, you got the dog, you got the ducks, you got the actual person shooting, and then you literally just have to choose background stuff, bush, grass, And I genuinely didn't realise when I was doing it that I actually kind of made a touch grass joke in my video, which I am fairly sure drove engagement at least a little bit. So I'm kind of glad I did. But yeah, there is the potential that with something like Duck Hunt, you could again rope in the light gun games, and yeah, that is an option. But to that, I will say they're not in the same franchise. The light gun games aren't really a franchise. You can kind of make the case that they could be, but I wanted to focus the franchise entirely on what they are and how they're presented. And the franchise is presented as Duck Hunt. Duck Hunt has moves from other games in its, moveset, but I actually just wanted to stick with the franchise and the franchise alone. And going for light gun games is valid, and if anyone else wants to make this kind of concept, they can really do it how they want. But I think that personally it just would feel wrong to me. So and also I just found it funny. And I'm glad that it wasn't just me that found it kind of funny that you can play as a mountain. But yeah, I just thought it just made more sense to me to do it like this, just in terms of keeping consistent, and it's not an entirely serious thing. Just to be entirely clear here, I'm not actually making this game. It's never going to exist, and it shouldn't exist, frankly. But it's just a fun hypothetical, so I didn't mind having something a bit silly like what I did with Duck Hunt in there. I just liked it. I just liked it. With R.O.B, there wasn't really much to talk about that I haven't already talked about, but there was actually something funny that happened that I just wanted to talk about quickly, which was after I made this video, I decided to think, okay, well, I've just gone to every subreddit, and I've asked each of them about for the things for this video, and it just kind of it was notable to me that certain franchises had more or less subscribers to those subreddits. than I was expecting. So I made a post on Reddit just saying, oh, this is all of the franchises kind of tiered based on how many people are on their sub. And there was just a few funny things like, obviously Minecraft was first. Mario was like 7th, 8th, or 9th or something like that. It was lower down than I expected, but it kind of makes sense in a way. And then there was things like Dark Hunt, where it was like 6 people, which I wasn't even sure for a while if it was actually a Duck Hunt sub, but it is what it is. But the one that was notable was R.O.B, because there wasn't actually a R.O.B subreddit, and that kind of struck me as not even necessarily odd, but just R.O.B has actually got a massive role in the video game industry, so it is. Yeah, I guess it is a little odd actually, because there is stuff to talk about. There is, I would say, cause for a R.O.B subreddit, and someone agreed with me because they ended up setting up a R.O.B subreddit, and that subreddit now has over 100 people on it. So I was apparently a influential in creating a R.O.B subreddit, or helping to cause a R.O.B subreddit to be created. So if you haven't already, I would recommend subbing to the R.O.B appreciation subreddit, because, the more people talking about R.O.B, the better, really. I think it's a cool little thing. With Metal Gear, again, a lot of people were critical of the fact that I didn't include multiple snakes, and like with Link, I could have. Actually, I probably would have if it was just down to me. It was actually mostly because when I asked the subreddit, a lot of people didn't really think that there was any need, so I just didn't. And this is the thing, it's a small sample size realistically, because this didn't become a big thing until I actually made the video and posted it. And even now, going to the subreddits, it's still not a massive thing when you ask it on the subreddits. So I'm dealing with a relatively small sample size, and there's going to be some bias that kind of gets in there. So if more people had responded, if I'd asked in maybe a different place, I might have got a lot of people who were including multiple snakes, and I probably would have. But again, that was just what I was told, and I was not against the idea of having more unique characters. So yeah. Also, with the Pikmin thing, I made a comment about the Plasm Wraith and Emperor Bulblax about the fact that you'd have to scale them down. I am aware that that's actually technically scaling them up, because they're actually like really small creatures, because that's the whole concept of Pikmin. I'm aware of that, and I've always been aware of the fact that they are meant to be really small, and I just didn't think about it when I wrote and recorded that line. It didn't flag for me at all. That was just a kind of a stupid thing to say. So yeah. For Animal Crossing, a lot of people said Ankha, the kind of Egyptian-inspired villager. I didn't. It's not that I was against the idea of going for a generic villager. I did have this concept in my mind of one that I literally called Animal, a character that I called Animal, and it would essentially be, the idea would be that they would maybe select 8 different animal villagers that can be in your game, and those would be the 8 alternate costumes for the character. And I thought that that's a cool idea. Reason I didn't include that was because it just felt a bit like I was bending my own rule in regards to multi-characters, which it really isn't. But I didn't really want to consider too hard the idea of, okay, well, what if I include this character so that I can include a bunch of other characters as alternate costumes? I didn't really want to delve into that too much. So I just kind of decided to abandon that idea. I think it's a cool idea, especially you could have it as like an echo of Isabelle, maybe. But yeah, Ankha is a good option, I guess. And a lot of people were like, "Why is Katrina there? That's a weird choice." It is a bit of a weird choice. And I admit that, but I just think that a fortune teller has some moveset potential. It's one of the. It's a kind of significant NPC, so I just thought it was a decent option. But yeah, Ankha is also a good option. Also, Wii Fit. We need to have a discussion, guys. Ring Fit is not part of the Wii Fit series. It's just not. They're not connected franchises at all. They just kind of have the word fit in them and revolve around a similar fitness-based idea. But other than that, they are not in any way linked. So it was just weird to me that people thought that the Ring Fit trainee was a valid option. No, I'm actually trying to do this where I'm only taking characters from a certain franchise, and Ring Fit isn't part of the Wii Fit franchise. I am going to be talking about Ring Fit in my upcoming video. There's actually a lot more options than you might think, so watch out for that one. But yeah, and I personally love both Wii Fit and Ring Fit. I'm actually a fan of both franchises, and I have no idea how I'm still fat. But yeah, I don't get why people kept suggesting Ring Fit trainee. It's just weird. The Mii Series. A lot of people pointed out the Mii Series is actually Smash. It's the Smash franchise. They're counted as Smash original characters. And yes, you would be correct if you're looking in-game. If you're looking on the Smash website, they are actually considered the Mii franchise. And so that's what I went with, because firstly, because I wanted to represent the Mii franchise, or just Mii characters in general, because I think there's some excellent options. And I as I said, I said in the video, I really enjoyed doing the options for the Mii franchise. And I just think it's better to do it that way. And also, it just feels like the Miis are not originally from the Smash franchise. And while technically the Mii fighters are, that's kind of just a weird way to look at it, because I don't know, it just doesn't feel in the spirit of it, in my opinion. And you know, if it had been counted, you know, on the website as Smash Original, maybe I would have considered, okay, well, I have to count these as Smash characters. But it's counted as the Mii franchise there, so that's kind of closed book in my opinion. And again, I am going to be actually doing Smash itself in the follow-up video, so watch that space. The Pyra and Mythra situation, I did allude to this in my video, but the issue with this is that I did not want to include multi-characters. And the reason I didn't want to include multi-characters is because it turns it, like, if you include a multi-character, you haven't narrowed it down to 8 characters. You've included a 9th character and just pretended that you've included 8 characters. It's just, multi-characters can function on their own. And we've seen that with Charizard, Sheik, and Zero Suit Samus. We've seen that these characters, with only minor alterations, essentially can act as their own characters. So it just feels weird to me to include multi-characters in this, because again, the idea is narrow down each franchise or expand each franchise to 8 characters. Multi-characters just don't feel like they keep in the spirit of that. And the reason I bring this up specifically for Pyra and Mythra is because, just like when I actually went to the subreddits, most people still were like, no, you can't do that. You have to include Pyra. You have to include Pyra and Mythra together, which I feel like you could probably just include Pyra. I don't think it's out of the realms of possibility. Like, even though I know that they are technically the same character, like canonically, it just doesn't feel outside of the realms of possibility to just include one. I feel like you could do that, but the issue is that people were very, very against the idea that you can, you know, the situation is you either have Pyra and Mythra, you know, cut from the game, or you choose one. You can't change. I'm not changing the rules of the challenge just to suit the Xenoblade specifically. That's not how I wanted it to work. And it just seems like people would rather not have Pyra or Mythra if it means they can't be a multi-character. So, yeah, that's that. Pyra and Mythra just don't get in. I don't know what you want me to tell you. Yeah, unless there's a solution where you can choose one character, you're not getting either. Sorry. Just a quick one on Final Fantasy and Persona. It would be kind of stupid to count it as the Final Fantasy VII franchise and the Persona 5 franchise, even though that's how they're listed. Because, like, realistically, Final Fantasy VII is not a franchise. It's a game. And the same goes for Persona 5. Even though, you know, there are games spinning off of Persona 5, it's still, Persona 5 isn't a franchise. And I know that people made, links to Wario and Yoshi and Donkey Kong in the fact that, and also Wii Fit in the fact that they are, parts of another franchise, but counted, as they're counted as their own franchise in Smash. And you could do the same for Persona 5 and Final Fantasy 7, but like, it's different because they're actually treated. Mario and Yoshi, for example, are actually treated as separate franchises in Smash, whereas Final Fantasy 7 and Final Fantasy aren't treated as separate franchises. They just label Final Fantasy as a franchise as Final Fantasy 7, mainly for marketing purposes, which doesn't feel like a good reason for me to not include Final Fantasy characters from other games and Persona characters from other games. In terms of Persona 5 specifically, I don't know why Marie got in terms of like people just suggested her. Maybe again, my own not knowing the franchise and getting these opinions from realistically relatively small pools of, responses, means that, characters like that, it takes maybe just a couple of people to mention Marie, and I had heard of her before, I recognized her, so I was like, oh, that sounds like a good idea. I now realise, because I was called out by Shay Frillis, of all people, I am now aware of the fact that Marie is just a really weird choice, and if I had my time again, I'd probably choose another character, but it is what it is. That's just kind of the nature of the beast here. With Strider, a lot of people kind of didn't understand the idea of having Strider instead of Luca. A lot of people kind of wanted... Well, again, it was another, this should be a multi-character. But again, I'm not including multi-characters just so I can include Luca. And a few people did say, it could work kind of like Kazuya. In the, Strider comes out for certain attacks. But firstly, that isn't how Strider works. And secondly, what you'd essentially be left with there is just a less interesting character. Because Luca himself, other than having his grappling hook wire thing, whatever it is, other than that, he doesn't really have a lot to work with in the moveset. Whereas Strider really does. Strider is... I actually really like Strider. I think Strider is such a cool design, and the fighting style is really cool. So I think that Strider is just more interesting. And while Luca himself is technically more plot relevant because he's in all three games, Strider is a form of Luca, so it still feels like you're getting Luca in there. It just feels like it makes for a better character, and a more loyal kind of representation of Luca or Strider and how Strider actually works. A lot of people mentioned the fact that actually there is a way to get Marina in the game, and that's how to have Pearl in like as a drone in kind of a Rosalina and Luma situation, which makes me really happy because it means that there is actually justification for having Marina in the game. The only issue is I'm not changing anything now, so it's a little bit too late. But I did like the fact that actually there is a way to justify my favourite Splatoon character getting into this concept. Richter, there's a little weird thing there where I don't know why I was under the impression that Trevor was a better choice than Richter. Because it seems that Richter is the more significant character and is from a more popular game. I don't know how I hadn't heard of Richter when he was announced, but I had heard of Trevor. I genuinely don't know. I don't play Castlevania. So, again, that was just a case of... and I did look through... A few people, when they commented, they did put Trevor over Richter. But a fair few people also put Richter over Trevor. So... yeah, I don't know really what happened there. But all of the discussion around Castlevania did get me to check out the Castlevania Netflix series because a lot of people said, "Oh, we have the Netflix trio," which is great. I'm glad I've watched it now in its entirety, and I will be talking about that in a video that's coming out towards the end of the year. And you know what? Now that I've watched the series, there's no way I'm cutting Trevor, because Trevor, Cypher, and Alucard are just amazing in the series, and I wouldn't want to cut them now, even though it probably makes sense to have Richter over Trevor. I had a few comments about Humba for Banjo and Kazooie, because a lot of people were like, well, is Humba actually an offensive Native American stereotype? Or not even that, but does it actually matter? I am not Native American, so I'm not going to try commenting on that. I just don't feel equipped to, make that decision. So, I just wanted to avoid Humba because I know, again, this isn't a serious thing. It's not as if I'm actually making this game and including an offensive stereotype. I could have included Humba. I could have. I just felt like, what, I saw a thread. It seemed like a lot of people were saying this character isn't okay. And I just figured it would be better to go look elsewhere. You can, a lot of people disagreed with that. That's fine. I get that. It was just a case of I didn't really want to. I just did feel comfortable making that decision. The final franchise I want to talk about is Kingdom Hearts because the whole thing about I don't want to include characters that are canonically the same as other characters. Yeah, that kind of apparently went completely out of the window when I got to Kingdom Hearts because half the characters I included were just versions of another character I'd included, which I was not aware of because I don't know Kingdom Hearts. As I said in the video, I haven't played it. I do want to be clear about the fact that wasn't an actual rule. That was just something I wanted to avoid because it just felt better to me personally. I just thought I don't want to include, for example, Sheik, while I'm also including Zelda. I would rather go for different characters. It wasn't an actual rule, and I think a lot of people got a bit confused about that. If I could have, I would have probably, chosen not to do that. I would have probably chosen to, choose other characters that aren't the same character canonically, but I didn't, and, it's not that big a deal, really. It was more of an optional thing I was trying to achieve. Apparently, I did not realise that Soma is apparently a reincarnation of Dracula as well for Castlevania. So, sorry. But again, that wasn't that important, really. Oh, and also, while I remember on Xenoblade, a lot of people said, Malos isn't a bad option, but I would personally include Jin. The reason that I didn't include Jin is actually probably a little bit pathetic. Just a little bit, again, not necessary, but I just didn't want characters with the same name. That's why I called the wolf from Game & Watch Egg Wolf, because I was like, I just would feel weird to me to have, characters with the same name, and you can do it, it's not a big deal, but I was like, do I really want to have two characters called Jin in this? And especially for that to be the only case with shared names, I don't want to do that. And I considered the idea of not having Jin and having Heihachi instead, but a lot of people, Jin is kind of like the main protagonist kind of in Tekken. It's a bit weird in Tekken with good guys and bad guys, but and also what a lot of people said about Heihachi, which that's another thing about Heihachi, about the fact that Heihachi is now in Tekken again, so that aged poorly before I'd even released the video. But it is what it is. These things weren't super important. Like, not having characters with the same name wasn't super important. You could have swapped Malos out for Jin. That's fine. It's just I didn't want to do that. I let my bias come in that way, and as someone who's not a Xenoblade fan, maybe that's unfair, but my video, so I can do what I want. Just before closing out, I just want to say I have been so happy with the response to the video. It was truly humbling to see so many people watching the video, and it was quite funny. I think I posted it really late at night because I was like, I want to really want to just get this video posted, and I posted it, and I woke up in the morning and it was 25 views, and I was like, okay, that's actually kind of normal for my channel. And then as the next morning kind of went on, it just kept growing and growing and growing, and I was like, Okay, this might actually overtake my most viewed video at 10,000. Yeah, and then it passed 10,000, and it wasn't looking like it was going to stop, and it just kept going and going and going. And obviously it's slowed down a significant amount now, but it was insane. I was on cloud 9. I really was, and I would not shut up about it to everyone in my life. My mum got so many updates about, oh, it's hit 20,000, it's hit 50,000, it's hit 100,000. So just thank you to everyone who watched it. Thank you to everyone who's watched this video as well. Who's obviously this one is just a follow up kind of thing, and I kind of rambly, but I just wanted to kind of answer a few questions, because I have been replying to a lot of the comments, and I have really enjoyed talking to people in the comments about this. But I did just kind of want to address it in a video, just for people who, just had some thoughts about it, and, wanted to see some answers to that. So thank you very much. I don't know when my next video will be out. The next video is going to be about Mario Kart, so watch that space, I guess, if you like Mario Kart. And I will be doing, as I said, a follow-up where I'm going to be talking about franchises that aren't represented with fighters in Smash. So I'm going to link my Reddit, so that if you would like to have a say on any of the franchises that I am selecting, you can do that. And other than that, have a lovely day or night, whichever it is for you, and I'll see you in the next one.